Scibase is a company based in Stockholm, in Sundbyberg. And Scibase was built on research originally done at Karolinska. We are listed on First North. I thought I'd begin with a little bit of background about what we do and the areas we work in. And Scibase works with something called, we're focused on the skin, and we work with something called impedance. Impedance is the resistance to alternating current. And our method is called electrical impedance spectroscopy, and we're world leaders in this method. How does it work? Well, what we do is we send very small signals, this is the skin, into the skin at different levels. And we know that some cells, different cells, have different structure, or tissue has different structure, and that has a different impedance. And we detect that, and we know that certain conditions are linked to certain structures, and that's what we try and detect. So we do it at different depths and at different frequencies, and it's a quick measurement, and it's non-invasive. And what we end up with is something called a spectra. We don't expect the physician to understand this. We have an AI-trained classifier, machine learning, that gives us a risk score, or an EIS score. So for melanoma, after doing a measurement, you can determine which lesions, which moles are benign, and which can be melanoma. And the higher the score, so from 4 to 10, the total range is from 0 to 10. 0 to 3 is benign. 4 to 10, the higher the score, the more likely it is that it's a melanoma. And we have proven this in the largest study ever done in the world, the largest study within melanoma detection. So the areas that we work in, first of all, melanoma, that's where we've been focused until now. Melanoma is a growing problem. It's the fastest growing cancer for men in Sweden, and it's the second fastest growing cancer for women. It's been growing for 30 years and is expected to continue to grow. And the costs associated with it grow very quickly as well. And the most important thing with melanoma is that you detect it early. If you detect it early, you can cure it. But that's often very difficult. There are no real good tools for the detection of melanoma. And that's where our product comes in, Nevisense. With Nevisense, you can measure on the mole, and you can get an instant evaluation of the risk associated with that mole. And the reason we do this is that we know that physicians have difficulty to detect these melanomas. And so to compensate for that, they end up excising or biopsying many, many unnecessary lesions. In Sweden, that number is 42. So to find a single melanoma, they excise 42 moles, costing around 150,000 kronor. So there must be a better way, and that's where our product comes in. The next area is a new area for us. We've been working on it for 3 years, but we just now have published our first data. And that's called barrier. The skin's barrier is extremely important, and the barrier in general in the body is extremely important in a number of diseases. Eczema, for example, atopic dermatitis, is a very, very common disorder, and this is very directly linked to skin barrier. When a child is born, you can measure the barrier of the child 2 days after they're born and predict whether they are going to develop eczema. Now, eczema in itself, you might think, is not such a big deal, but it is. It's 20% of all children, and it becomes chronic in up to 8% of adults. And a number of those children go on to develop food allergies. Food allergies you get through the skin. It's not through what you eat. So when you have a poor skin barrier, food particles cause a sensitization event, and then you get food allergies. This is not really well known, but it's becoming more and more well known. So what we do with Nevisense, our product, is that we can determine how good the barrier is. These are the two things we look at, the stratum corneum and the stratum granulosum. And if we see that a patient has a poor barrier, then they can adjust treatment or do certain new treatments that are soon available. So the ability to determine the skin's barrier is very important. And there is a method available that's only used in research. It's been around for 30 years and it has not transitioned to clinical. So what we do is we kind of piggyback off that method called transepidermal water loss, and we're taking this product now to the clinic. So since we published our data in April, we've been inundated with interest. These are researchers within eczema, they're within asthma, within lots of areas, and all of these are barrier related. Just back to this, children start with eczema and then they develop often food allergies, and after that allergic rhinitis and so on, and even asthma, and all of these are linked. They're all barrier related disorders. So we have the first product available in the world to quickly and easily determine the status of the barrier. The third area is called non-melanoma skin cancer, and there it's about basal cell carcinoma and squamous cell carcinoma. These are not as dangerous as melanoma, but they're 10 times more common. So in Sweden, 50,000 cases, and growing very quickly. It's the fastest growing cancer within women. And we know that our product can be used to detect non-melanoma skin cancer, and what we work on is an indication within this area. So how large are these areas? Well, melanoma, we know that there's about 50 million screenings done per year, formal screenings. About 7 million in the markets that we're interested in, 7 million biopsies or excisions. That's a conservative figure. And so our market is somewhere between that 7 and 50. When it comes to non-melanoma skin cancer, just in the US, there are 5 million cases a year. Skin barrier is the biggest of them all, and 20% of all children, up to 8% of all adults, just for eczema. And then you have all these other disorders. So for us, we started with melanoma, but now we are transitioning and parallel developing these other market areas. Our main customers are private dermatologists and hospitals, and they have different kind of drivers. The private dermatologist is about giving the best possible care, not missing a melanoma, not excising if I don't need to, whereas hospitals, it's all about saving money. And we know that with our product, and what we showed in our studies, we could reduce the number of excisions, unnecessary excisions or biopsies, with 34%. What we see in reality is a higher number than that, but 34% is the number we have in our data. And we detect many more melanomas than most clinicians. We are now also looking at a new area, which is non-specialists, retail, and eventually even consumer, but we have some things to do before we can address that market. Our business model is very simple. It's a razor blade model. We sell electrodes. We sell systems at a reasonable price, 5,000 euros approximately, and then 35 euros for a single patient. And with that, you can measure up to 20 lesions or 20 areas on the skin. Our goal is to reach a 70% gross margin within the next year to 2 years, and we're well on the way to that. We have done okay in Germany, reasonably well in Germany. We have 230 clinics using the system. We have 250 systems out there. And this quarter, we had our best quarter ever, and we sold 6,000 tests, so 6,000 electrodes. And that was a 40% increase on last year. I'm going to explain a little bit why. We're up over 60,000 patients tested, and so we know that the system works. This is just for melanoma. And 250 or 230 clinics, I mean, the total potential just in Germany alone is 2,800 private clinics. That's before we look at hospitals. So there's a lot of potential remaining. The largest market in the world, of course, is the US. And the US is, it takes time. And we were approved 1.5 years ago, but we're still working on getting reimbursement, it's called. And that's a process that we hope next year we will get a code. That takes time. It's 13,000 dermatologists. It's a lot of demand, a large market. And there we also work with large chains, dermatology chains can be 100 clinics in a single customer. So that's moving forward, and it's a large potential. And then if you just go through a little bit the recent progress we've had in the company. We launched what we call Nevisense 3 at the end of last year. Nevisense 3 was a quicker, easier way to do our measurement, and this was our biggest problem. This is what was really causing us problems. It took too long. These clinicians have a high throughput, so even though our method only took 5 minutes, that was too long. So now we have it down to 1 to 2 minutes to do a measurement. We also had German guidelines published by the German Skin Cancer Society of Dermatologists, which talked about how to use our product. And so the result of that was a good improvement in sales in Germany in Q4, and that has followed through in Q1. And we're optimistic. We've seen a large effect from the release of Nevisense 3. We've upgraded essentially all of the customers that we have in the market. We improved our gross margin last year and into Q1, and I'll talk about that briefly. Publishing articles, and we started a barrier agreement with a researching group in Switzerland, and that has already given us some good progress. Electrode sales increased significantly, and then we've also submitted the next version of Nevisense to the US FDA. The other thing we're working on is submitting claims to the US insurance companies. This is something that you do to get them used to you. And we've had already four insurance companies who have paid out at a reasonable rate in the US. So we're quite happy with that progress. Of course, it takes time, but things are moving forward. And as I said, the first barrier data was published, and we expect to have 2 or 3 more publications this year. And really, there has been a lot of interest in the barrier application. So we had, here was when we released Nevisense 3, and we saw an immediate increase. We still have, obviously, some way to go. We saw also this happen with electrode sales, and we see a continued trend here. So we're quite happy the effect of Nevisense 3, even though it took us over a year to do that development, we see the effect in the number and in the data. And we see that our customers are very happy. It's not just that we have more purchases from the existing customers, we have more of our customers purchasing more often, and we're quite happy to see that. So we were up 47% in Q1 when it came to electrode sales, which is our main driver. Gross margin, we continue to work on. We're over 50% now on a regular 4 quarters in a row, and we have 3 major projects ongoing to improve that the electrode part of the gross margin. So we should see some effects of that at the end of the year and into next year, but they are significant projects. And again, we see that this target of 70% in the next year to year and a half is a reasonable target. Overall, we have 58 million kroner in cash, and so we have still significant funding. The next steps. Well, the 4 main parts of our strategy have been the German focus with Nevisense for melanoma. Then we have really working hard to develop the US market, and there we are not selling broadly across the whole US. We're focusing on the Northeast, and we're focusing on reimbursement. New applications, there I'm talking about barrier and about non-melanoma skin cancer, and we've made really significant strides within those 2 areas this year. And finally, we have been working for some time on a next generation technology, and we have taken our device, which is about as big as a laptop, and I've lost my my screen, and we have miniaturized it so that the entire system fits into this pen. So the idea with this is that instead of having this large system that you're forced to carry around everywhere, you can go in the pocket. And we did this by developing what's called an application-specific IC together with Coty. So we miniaturized the entire system onto a single chip. So we will release this in 2020, and this will allow us to have a radically different price point for the device. We have the same electrode, the same business model, but with a completely different way to deliver it. This same pen can be used for melanoma, for barrier, and for non-melanoma skin cancer. You can drive it based on the electrode that you use. So this is very exciting for us, and opens up a lot of potential, not just within, allows us to go away from just dermatologists, specialists, to GPs and other markets. Yes?
Sorry for interrupting you.
Yes.
But these new manic, should it replace Nevisense 3.0?
Well, it uses the same measurement technique as Nevisense 3.0. That's a good point. So once we develop Nevisense 3...
Because all these upgrades, it seems like it also it will be some problems as well, because in the States you have to file again and file again.
Excellent question. We have not changed the core algorithm or the electrode, and these are the two absolutely critical things that we cannot change without doing a lot of clinical data. But we actually will submit for Nevisense 3, at least in the US now, in June, and we hope that we will get an approval this year. But it does take time. US lags about a year behind the rest of the world, so we can get it approved. We got Nevisense 3 is already approved in Europe. We have over 15,000 patients now, but it does take time to come into the US.
This new measurement device,
På svenska.
The German clinics, will they use that one as a complement?
It depends on the customer. They don't require a normal Nevisense to use this. Okay, so this can be self-standing. We've miniaturized the entire electronics in it. But it may be that some customers would prefer the normal Nevisense. You have many more capabilities in terms of data storage and so on.
Yes,
but
exactly.
yeah, but our idea is that over the medium term, that this will replace Nevisense. You know, this is the normal Nevisense that we have today.
Exactly.
But it will take some time. You know,
The big change was when you
introduce Nevisense 3.
exactly,
Yes.
that was the big
And that Nevisense 3 was necessary to take the method to a smaller form factor.
Okay.
So good point. Okay, so next steps for us, we are now we will present Barrier for the very first time next week in Lisbon, and we have 2 presentations and a poster about this technique. We expect a lot of interest. We have been approached by many of the world's best researchers already. This is happening very quickly because they're crying out for a method to measure barrier. So barrier is the focus for us right now. We also, in the second half of this year, we have studies that are necessary for our reimbursement process in the US next year, and they will be done during the second half of this year. And we will continue to work with the US insurance companies. We hope to release a new version, including non-melanoma skin cancer and barrier at the end of the year, but that will depend on how the results go. And then finally, next year, we will release the pen, and we will focus on reimbursement in the US and try to broaden the indications for both barrier and non-melanoma skin cancer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I'll just stay within Nevisense 3.0.
Yes.
So you expect an approval or at least a response from FDA here in this year.
Yes.
What are the main risks for this approval, you think?
Well, you never know how FDA will react. We've already got first when you do a PMA, which we did, that takes a long time. Then you do small updates to that PMA called supplements. The first supplement went relatively quickly, and now we think we have a good relationship with the FDA. We've had good, everything has gone relatively quickly in the first supplement, and we hope that it will go quickly on the second supplement. But you never know. FDA could ask for more data. They could ask for a small study, or you never know. But our hope is that we will be approved at the end of the year in the US.
Yeah.
And again, and then you can have this simpler, easier method for use in the US as well.
So you told us a little bit about the positives regarding this new software. How come you didn't identify this earlier?
Good point. I think we tried very much to optimize. There were two parts to the measurement. Before we used to do a reference measurement, and then we did a lesion measurement, and we worked very hard to optimize this process. And then we had a suggestion from one of the team to, why don't we just take the reference measurement away? And everyone laughed at him, and we tried it, and actually we improved the accuracy of the device in doing that. So we can get the data that we got from the reference measurement before we get it from the actual lesion measurement, and that has been the big thing. So yeah, 2020 hindsight, I think, we should have maybe seen it earlier, but we didn't. And we're very happy with where we are now with Nevisense 3, and customers are very happy, and we see that in the purchasing rates.
And these new skin barrier opportunities, they sound really interesting for you. What can we expect near term, you think?
Well, that's a good question too. I think our focus in the beginning is to work with the top researchers and industry partners. So obviously, these are large disorders, lots of interest. There are industrial players very interested, obviously, in the ability to measure barrier. There are thousands of researchers out there who try to measure barrier today with the existing method called transepidermal water loss. And I would say after meeting probably 50 of them, I'd say none of them are particularly happy. So that's the reason that in 2 months we've been included already in 3 studies, where the first study is already started, and that's with children. We have another study, 2 studies in the US, one which I will leave now to start tomorrow, and that's a drug study. And then we have another study already approved to go forward in the US. And I expect 5 to 10 studies this year. So what we're going to do in the beginning is we're going to use researchers as a customer group. So they pay for the equipment, and that's kind of difficult in the beginning. But I've done it before, and it is possible. And so we would try to develop that market, and then of course with industry partners, there are a lot of pharma companies, for example, are very interested in the ability to, in an easy way, measure skin barrier. And if you think forward, and a couple of years, and think that okay. You could, for example, be able to predict a flare in eczema. People who have eczema, they get these flares. It comes up and they don't know why. But if you could measure your barrier, and this is barrier on healthy skin, you can see the body, because it's a systemic disorder, you can see the barrier going down, and that's what precedes a flare in eczema. So there's enormous potential within barrier.
And just lastly, you talked about these 3 or 4 projects that you have, gross margin improvements that you see from. Could you elaborate a bit more regarding those?
Okay, so we do our production for electrodes in Uppsala. We have a small factory there, and they're very complicated electrodes to manufacture, and we have been developing 3 big steps when it comes to improving the process to manufacture these electrodes. So we have installed a new piece of machinery that will help that. We also have a robot that we validated last year, and that's working well. And then we have 2 other main parts of the process that we expect to be finished in Q3, and we hope to see results of those at the end of the year.
Simon, thank you very much for coming in.